Welcome to day 27 in our study of the life of the Apostle Paul. Our title for today is Paul's Journey to Rome. Our reading comes from Acts chapter 27 and 28. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra of Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy, and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete, off Salome. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they would reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me, and not have set sail from Crete, and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. As the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boats into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you.' And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now, when it was day, they had not recognized the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and let them into the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow struck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who would swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. Chapter 28. After we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Now, in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island, named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly, and when we were about to sail, they put us on board whatever we needed. After 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria with twin gods as figurehead. Putting in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days, and from there we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. And after 1 day, a south wind sprang up, and on the 2nd day we came to Puteoli. There we found brothers, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome, and the brothers there, when they heard about us, came as far as the Forum of Appius, and 3 taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. And when we came into Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with the soldier who guarded him. There are places in the world that are known as the ship graveyards. They are places where modern supertankers, cruise ships, cargo haulers, and more are taken to be scrapped out. They are driven full speed into the shore where they hold fast. In Mauritania, the Bay of Nurebandao, the Aral Sea in the Eurasian country of Uzbekistan, and Alang Ship Breaking Yard, the world's largest graveyard with respect to ships breaking in the Indian subcontinent in India. But these are all intentional scuttling of ships. There are treacherous waters that sailors know well to take care while sailing through. Along the outer banks of North Carolina, there is an estimated to have been more than 5,000 ships that have sunk, according to Valerie J. Grusing, who was part of a team that promoted the development of the heritage of the graveyard of the Atlantic. For so that area is known. The Great Lakes region in the United States contains an estimated 10,000 shipwrecks, according to historians. Other places in the world known for treacherous travel by sailors is the Cape Horn off the South American coast and the Cape of Good Hope off the coast of South Africa. The Western Mediterranean Ocean is well known for treacherous sailing conditions, and modern maritime archaeologists find a plethora of relics from long-lost shipwrecks in the graveyards of the waters dotted by the islands near modern-day Turkey. Several of those islands sound quite familiar to Bible readers, as they are the very same islands the passengers and the prisoner Paul saw on his journey to Rome almost 19 centuries ago, recorded in our passage for consideration today. Previously, Paul had appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar he must go according to Roman law. As we have seen in reading this chapter and half of chapter 28, this is easier said than done. There's a certain amount of background that is good to know in order to better understand what this journey entails. This won't be covered in its entirety simply because of the time and space constraints. However, there are some details that beckon to be clarified so as to gain an appreciation of the situation. Julius the centurion. A centurion typically was over 50 to 100 men, depending on the need at the time. The Augustan cohort that he was part of, according to historian Josephus, was assigned to the region of Caesarea. You may recall that Cornelius was of the Italian cohort, also at Caesarea. A cohort consisted of up to 600 soldiers. It is not known how many soldiers that Julius took with him. That would largely depend upon the number of prisoners, of which number is also not known to us. It may have been significant numbers of both groups, seeing that it is mentioned in Acts 27, verses 42 through 43, when we read, "The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land." According to historians, anyone who was entrusted with a prisoner was obligated to guard them with their life. If the prisoner escaped, their life was forfeited. We read in Acts chapter 12, verse 19, "And after Herod searched for him and did not find him, he examined the sentries and ordered that they should be put to death." A fate the Philippian jailer knew all too well when he thought those under his care had escaped, and he drew his sword and was about to kill himself in Philippi, Acts chapter 16 and verse 27. The fact that the centurion treated Paul kindly is a tribute to both of their characters. Paul could be trusted, which we found in every case in which Paul encountered a Roman official. Sergius Paulus on Cyprus in Acts 13:7, Gallio in Corinth in Acts 18:12, Felix and Festus in Caesarea. Notice in verse 2 the pronoun we. Luke is with Paul as well as the disciple Aristarchus. Paul would call Aristarchus his fellow prisoner in Colossians 4:10. The ship of Adramyttium was used to transport the group and is headed towards the western end of modern-day Turkey. It would no doubt be expected that several different ships might be required to get this group to Rome. Remember, there are no cruise lines or regular transportation companies or routes. One thing that has no doubt become a factor is the season for sailing is now about to close. Rather than delay the trip, the perhaps inexperienced centurion shuns Paul's advice in favor of the pilot and pushes on. After all, Paul knew something of the sea, having written to the church at Corinth several years before about his experience in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25. He writes, "3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea." Ships, their owners and captains, aren't as interested in convenience as apparently this Alexandrian cargo vessel laden with grain desires a better harbor for winter. The fast referred to by Luke is the Day of Atonement, typically in the month of October. Modern-day mariners, as well as those throughout the centuries since this book is penned by Luke, will readily recognize the terms, strategies, and tactics used by those first-century sailors as they take on this northeaster, or in other versions, Euroclydon or Euroclydon. Sailing under the protection of islands, drawing up the skiff, letting the ship drive, undergirding the ship with cables, taking in the sails, lightening the load first of anything of weight, then casting the tackle overboard, then the cargo. We find that Paul admonishes them for their actions, for we read in Acts 27, verse 22 through 24, "And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. With the situation seemingly hopeless, even the crew tries escaping. But Paul assures them that they will all survive, but they must stick together. They do indeed suffer no loss of life, though the ship is wrecked. On the island of Malta, they survive, and Paul continues doing the Lord's work by healing the father of Publius. Having been treated kindly, they find another ship, and with little in the way of drama in the remainder of their trip, they make their way to Rome. Who could have imagined such a journey as what they had just endured? Yet God is good for his word that Paul would indeed testify in Rome. Still, a great chapter of Paul's life lies yet ahead of him. Could you imagine yourself in Paul's place through all of this? Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow for another lesson in the life of the Apostle Paul.